Shalom, Laila Tov, Mashlomech, Mashlomcha. This video is about cannabis-induced psychosis. So in my anti-marijuana crusade, which is insane that I even have to do this, the government used to protect people from drug dealers. Now they are the drug dealers and are run by the drug dealers and are the drug dealers' bitch. Marijuana is a drug, porn is a drug, fucking you name it. Ugh. But I'm just going to read this article and make some observations on it. Trial for woman who killed during cannabis-induced psychosis begins with grisly evidence. And just a trigger warning for the weaker in stomach. They mean grizzly. Name was Bryn Spejcher. Forgive me if I'm pronouncing that wrong. In California, the weed state, the first state to legalize the big marijuana industry, like epicenter, right? Walked into a courtroom, first day of the manslaughter trial in Ventura on Thursday for death of Chad O'Melia. Huh. He seems white, might be white Jewish. I wonder if Chad O'Melia was of a certain ethnicity that I'm assuming. Because Omelia sounds very much like a certain ethnicity. Chad Omelia, Thousand Oaks. Yeah, he was white. Oh, whitey. Anyway, the article was updated to correct the spelling. Anyway, it's accepted as a fact that, and I will link the source in the description. Of course. It is accepted as a fact in Bryn Spejcher's manslaughter trial that she was suffering from cannabis-induced psychosis when she stabbed Chad O'Melia to death in 2018 at his Thousand Oaks condominium. That's why the charge is involuntary manslaughter. Prosecutors reduced it from murder when their own medical expert agreed with the defense's experts regarding her mental state. Just going to pause right there. So if marijuana is harmless, then why is cannabis-induced psychosis a legitimate defense against murder charges? Pretty sure murder is harmful. Right. We live in the age of corruption. Truth is not acceptable. I continue. Still, seeing the video of her in the midst of that psychosis was a shock to many in the Ventura courtroom on Thursday, the first day of her trial. The first evidence introduced by the prosecution included police body camera footage that showed Spejcher kneeling over O'Melia's body and stabbing herself in the neck with an 8-inch serrated knife, even as an officer used his stun gun on her repeatedly. She dropped the knife only after another officer struck her 9 times. Sorry, I'm laughing at the phone images of this dead guy. Officer struck her 9 times with his retractable steel baton. Needless to say, I feel no sympathy for people who smoke marijuana when they get murdered, particularly when their death is related to the marijuana. Karma, to me. Beautiful. It's karmic justice. Anyway, O'Malia's father left the courtroom just before the video began. Many of the audience members who stayed gasped or cried out, and others covered their eyes. The jurors watched wide-eyed, some with their hands over their mouths or held to their heads. Spejcher lowered her head and cried when the video played. Her mother broke down, falling to the floor and sobbing, until Judge David Worley called a brief recess to let Spejcher and her attorneys help her out of the courtroom. Opening statements. Sorry, my foot's kind of paining right now. Doing the toe stretching. Opening statements agree on basic facts. Most of what happened that night is not in dispute. In their opening statements on Thursday, attorneys for both the defense and prosecution said that on May 27, 2018, Spejcher and O'Melia got together for a quiet evening at the condominium O'Melia shared with two roommates. Spejcher, 27 at the time, was an audiologist at UCLA Health. O'Melia, 26, worked at an accounting firm and was studying to be a certified public accountant. They had been dating for a few weeks. She liked Chad, her attorney Robert Schwartz told the jury during his opening statement. There was never any conflict. It was entirely a harmonious relationship. Amelia and Spejcher met at a dog park. He had a German shepherd named Athena. She had a husky named Aria, which she brought with her to his condo that night. They watched TV and talked, and a little after midnight, Amelia and Spejcher went to the patio and smoked marijuana out of his glass bong. It was a daily habit for him, but a rare occasion for her. She had smoked only a few times before and never felt high. These are important details, just for those who don't know. Normally I'll get into them later, but I'll get into them just now. So if he was an attorney and was legitimately holding a job and paying his own rent while smoking marijuana daily, you could argue that he was a functioning marijuana addict, right? It's addiction if you're doing it every day. It's addiction. But he held a job, paid his bills, etc. My initial concept was genetics are involved. He has some sort of genetic superiority that she doesn't because she went psycho and killed him. But I now don't agree with that. If you're genetically superior, then why can't you live without the weed? It's not addictive. Could you just quit? And the fact that he was killed by a woman who had, less upper body strength than he does, that's not genetic inferiority. It's not biological inferiority at the very least. And genetics is biology, so I digress. It was a daily habit for him, but a rare occasion for her. She had smoked only a few times before and never felt high. That is also a key detail. She does not have the same neurochemical response that he did to the chemical. This time, she took a bong hit and told O'Melia she didn't feel anything. He said he would get her, quote, something more intense. Senior Deputy District Attorney Audrey Knopfziger said in her opening statement. O'Melia packed the bowl again, lit it, filled the chamber with smoke, held his hand over the opening, and lifted his hand for Spejcher to inhale. She has an immediate negative reaction, Knopfziger said, and soon things got out of control. She thought she was dead, Knopfziger said. She had an out-of-body experience. She could see her own dead body. She could hear voices, emergency room doctors doing CPR, her family, other voices, unknown voices, telling her that to bring herself back to life, she would have to kill Chad O'Melia. These are also important details. These are symptoms that match positive symptom presentation of schizophrenia, specifically the voices and the hallucinations, and the homicidal thoughts, homicidal urges. Spejcher attacked O'Melia with at least 3 knives from the kitchen knife block. He suffered more than 100 sharp force injuries, Knopfziger said, including stab wounds to his heart, lungs, and carotid artery, any of which could have been fatal. The more she stabbed him, the more she felt she was bringing herself back to life, Knopfziger said. After killing Chad O'Melia, she took the large serrated bread knife and began to stab herself over and over. Schwartz did not dispute those facts in his opening statement. He told the jury the graphic photos and videos from the scene illustrate the depths of the psychotic state Bryn Spejcher was in. Schwartz is the prosecutor, Knapziger is the defense. Spejcher will testify in her own defense, Schwartz says. He called her a special person, a person of high character. She suffered severe hearing loss at birth, he said. Probably why she became an audiologist, to help others like her. Also, possibly a signifier of something genetic. He and has dedicated her life to helping others who also have hearing loss and hearing impairment. She had no history of mental illness before the night she killed O'Malley, Schwartz said, and no way to know that smoking pot would trigger a psychotic episode. Just going to pause right there. That is quite hilarious because all the lying, weed pushing scumbags, to get them to tell the truth is like pulling teeth. It's really difficult, but when you finally get them to admit there is a connection between cannabis and psychosis, they'll say, oh, that's only if you're genetically predisposed. To which I reply, well, since the government has acknowledged this, is there any sort of system in place to prevent people with a genetic predisposition from being exposed to cannabis? Is there any sort of, policies implemented in place to background, family, medical history check, etc.? The answer is never yes, and there will be. Oh yeah, we should push for that. That's a good idea to prevent shit like this from happening. They don't care about the truth. But this says that it happens to people who have no genetic predispositions, no mental illness, no pre-existing conditions. So I'm going to repeat this. She had no history of mental illness before the night she killed O'Malley, and no way to know that smoking pot would trigger a psychotic episode. She's not the only one that cannabis-induced psychosis has worked as a legal defense for murder, with no history of mental illness, no family history, etc. Quote, she didn't want to, or sorry, I'm quoting her lawyer. She didn't want to smoke that night, her lawyer said. O'Malley pressured her. It's true, we junkies are really aggressive because they're scumbags. And insisted that she inhale from the bong, Schwartz said. Because most of the facts are not in dispute, the main question for the jury will be whether Spejcher meets the legal definition for involuntary intoxication. Now, this is fun for me. I was so unaware of how bad things have gotten. This means that California has had so many cases, and I'm guessing this is all the way up to Seattle and New Mexico as well. So many cases of cannabis-induced psychosis as a legal defense for homicides and worse, rapes, etc., child rapes, yeah, that the law is actually changing to whether it's voluntary or involuntary. Therefore, if it was cannabis-induced psychosis, but you voluntarily consumed the cannabis, not knowing it would cause psychosis, not knowing you had some sort of, family history of mental illness, like for me, my mom lied about it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, then you're still accountable. But if it was involuntary intoxication, which secondhand exposure is involuntary intoxication, then it's a legally valid defense. And we're at stages, we're at degrees of legal defense. Right now, their cannabis-induced psychosis causing the homicide is not in dispute. That's why the charges dropped down to manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter instead of murder. It's a question of whether it was involuntary intoxication or not that will make it involuntary manslaughter versus, temporary insanity. Involuntary intoxication. To show that her use was involuntary, her attorneys could argue that she could not have foreseen the possible effects of the weed she smoked, or that she was coerced or deceived into smoking it, or that there was another substance added to it without her knowledge. Right. A lot of weed junkies will do that. You tell them cannabis causes psychosis that led to me electrocuting myself. Oh, that must have been the synthetic weed, or it was laced with something, man. These people are morons and liars. Apparently, morons and liars become lawyers. Who would have thought? Ah. Schwartz said in his opening statements that the defense witnesses will testify that all these are possible and that the jury can and should conclude that Miss. Oh, sorry, Schwartz is the defense attorney. I apologize. I got their roles switched. Um, and that the jury can and should conclude that Miss Spejcher's intoxication that night was involuntary. Schwartz said one defense expert will testify that it appears there likely was quote unquote high potency marijuana or even another substance in the bong. The bong was empty, so there were no lab tests of what was in it, but Spejcher and O'Malley's blood both tested positive only for THC, the psychoactive compound in marijuana, pausing it. That means there was nothing laced. It was just weed. No alcohol involved either. Continuing. The only marijuana police found in the condo was a few grams in a container from an unlicensed delivery service. Imagine that, the black market still thriving after legalization and only growing stronger. Ah, it's like the politicians lied, and so did the marijuana pushers. No way! It tested at 4% THC. You heard that right. 4%. Well below the levels in most cannabis sold at legal dispensaries. THC content above 20% is routine, and stronger weed often has more than 30% THC. In a pre-trial motion, Nafziger asked the judge to prevent the jury from hearing arguments about involuntary intoxication and about the possibility that other substances could have been in the bong. Worley ruled against both motions. See, this is weird because this is just a battle of lies between the prosecution and the defense. They're trying to out bullshit each other. The American justice system is so fucked. During her opening statement, Nafziger said Speicher's intoxication was voluntary because she chose to smoke from the bong that was offered to her. Now, I'm kind of in the gray on this because weed junkies are very big on peer pressure. They are very aggressive about it. They don't just take no for it. They're like rapists. They're raping you with the weed, literally. The law says when someone voluntarily ingests an intoxicant and bad things happen, like a DUI, the person responsible is the person who voluntarily ingests the intoxicant and does the bad thing, Nafziger said. We don't get to blame other people when we do something bad because we wanted to get high. Schwartz said his client did not actually want to get high. Now, that I could believe according to the witness testimony, but anecdotal testimony isn't evidence because anecdotal testimony can be falsified. He said O'Malley did not intend for Spejcher to have such an extreme reaction, obviously, but the evidence will show he knew what the potentially devastating effects could be to a novice user and didn't tell her that. Likely he was using it as a date rape drug. If he would get her high, then, he could get some sex, right? Use weed, sex, yeah. One of O'Malley's roommates was also a novice user who had a bad reaction to smoking from O'Malley's bong about 2 months earlier. That roommate, Vinny de Oliveira, testified Thursday about what he called his bad trip when he smoked for the first time with O'Malley and another friend. I started to see the walls and people's faces moving like the ocean, and I felt my heart beating really fast, de Oliveira said. I told them I felt like I was dying. He wanted his friends to take him to the hospital. They told him to lay down and wait it out instead. What good friends. Had they just been honest about the weed, maybe Amelia would still be alive. De Oliveira testified that he threatened to strip his clothes off and run outside because then someone would see that he needed help and to take him to the hospital. Omelia and his other friend convinced De Oliveira not to do that. They took him to his room and turned on South Park and told him to try to take a nap. It did get better, De Oliveira said. I woke up hungry and they took me to a donut shop. Speicher's trial is expected to last a few weeks. She is free on bail and has been since 2018. If she is convicted of involuntary manslaughter, she is likely to be sentenced to up to 4 years in prison, though her sentence could be longer because she is charged with enhancements, including using a deadly weapon and exhibiting great violence. Weird. Great violence on marijuana. Who would have thought? Yeah, so the fact that this occurred in 2018, and this is the first I've heard about it, and they're still pushing legalization. That's just fucking nuts.